Perfect. Okay. Good morning and welcome to our first forum for 2023. I'm Isabel, the Membership and Communications Manager at Local Government Professionals New South Wales, and I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet. Today I'm on Gadigal land and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us today. Just a quick update on new opportunities we have exclusively available to members. The peer placement program provides you with the opportunity to work in another council for a few days. So if there's something in particular you've seen done well by another council, now is your chance to have a fully funded placement. Applications close 10th of March. We also have Place, which is a challenge for senior managers and encourages you to step out of your day-to-day. Applications for that close the 28th of April. And lastly, we have the Local Government Excellence Awards, and this is your last call to submit your nominations, as I've been told there is no extension on the 16th of March deadline. Any questions, feel free to email me. My email's just there at the bottom, but we have a lot more on our website, so just check that out. And just a bit of housekeeping, please note that the session is being recorded. We ask that your microphone remains muted unless asking a question, but you can add any questions or comments in the chat section if you'd prefer. Yes, I will now hand over to Jeff to commence the forum. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, good morning, one and all. Hope you're well. Just reordering my screen as we go. So as you can appreciate, got a number of screens available to me at the moment. All right, so good morning. As Isabel mentioned, my name is Jeff Burton. I'm the Business Planning Performance Manager here at the City of Sydney, and I'm also the chair of this network, New South Wales Integrated Planners Network. So on screen, hopefully you can see that, is a number of key events for 2023 that local government professionals are running, and there's three key ones for us in blue. So the first one is stepping into supervising. So it's a good cause for those entering into that next level. Workforce planning intensive, encourage you to encourage your colleagues in that area to go along and attend if that is something they're interested in, and even if they're not interested in, because it's one of our least qualified areas of integrated planning. And then the local government conference across end of May and 1st of June. And then we get into our more relevant areas, which is the Integrated Planners Intensive. So it's a full week up at Bathurst from the 24th of July, and many of the exec members on the Integrated Planners Network are presenting on that. So I encourage those new to IPR space to get in early and book your space. Now, it seems like a long way away, but September is the date for our Integrated Planners Conference. We haven't picked a location as yet, but we're starting to plan out what that event could look like. So if you've got any great ideas or topics or suggestions, always happy to hear them, and send them through to me, or if you've got a few ideas today, put them in the chat. So I encourage you to use the chat function today as much as possible. And we've also got planned a forum, potentially online or potentially face-to-face in November, and we'll advise a date closer to that. All right, so as I mentioned before, we do have a strong executive, and I won't go through everyone's names here, but you can see the slide, and a great team. We're getting together every month. We talk about the events coming up and other issues in this space. So welcome to those here today. This is the agenda for today. We'll be pressed for time. It seems like we've got a lot of time, but be surprising how quick that does go today. So we do have a number of different speakers. So thank you for those that have been volunteered or have volunteered to present today. appreciate the extra efforts that go into putting together a presentation for events like this. So we'll have the Office of Local Government, Karen Purser, this morning, giving us a brief update from Office of Local Government. Then we'll have a session on special rates with a number of speakers for that, and a quick panel session or questions. Then we'll have a quick break, and then we'll come back for a session regarding the next round of IPR. And then we'll have a breakout session, which enables you to network with your colleagues from across the state. So we'll be put into breakout rooms, and so we can have a chat about a few topics. And then we'll come back for general business and close. And we're going to try something a bit different at the end of that. So stay tuned right for the end. All right, so get as much as you can out of this event. Ask questions. If you need to ask questions, put them in the chat. The team will be monitoring the chat as we go. All right, so just a quick update on the network. So welcome to a number of new members that have joined the fraternity, and also to those that have joined the LinkedIn network. So it's a closed network on LinkedIn. Got about 128 members at the moment, and quite active, about 118 active members over the last 3 months. So it's good to see. We're well in our way, as I said, for the IPR intensive, and we're looking at adjusting and reflecting the content for that to include more about service reviews and service planning into the intensive. And also we're looking at the conference and the content for that, as I mentioned before. Now, something new on the horizon is, and it's in early days at the moment, is we're looking at a service review workshop program aimed to enable practitioners to sit with other councils that may be in the same development cycle as you, in terms of, have you got a service review program already, or have you started and you want to reflect on how you could do it better? So we're looking at how to design that in the coming weeks and months as well. So that's quite exciting. Well, I think so anyway. All right. We do have a slot here for Karen Purser, if Karen is here on the line.
He's just arrived.
Just arrived. Perfect timing. All right. Are you there, Karen? So if I could also ask you at this stage to turn off your videos if you can, unless you're presenting, just helps us manage our bandwidth a little bit better, because we are spread right across New South Wales. So extracting the best we can out of our bandwidth at this time of the day is pretty crucial. So Karen, are you there? Karen Purser?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome along.
I'm in a rest stop just outside of Cowra on my way to Wagga, and it's a very lovely day.
Good to hear, Karen. Good to hear. All right, so I'll hand over to you. You've got the floor.
Thank you. So thanks for having me, and nice to be back together again in 2023, which has been off to a fairly tame start compared to some other years recently. We don't have a huge update. I guess probably the most important thing is that we've been mogged again. This is, another day, another mog for OLG, but we're no longer with Crown Lands. We're now back to being a standalone agency as part of the planning cluster, which we're super happy with, because it's a better fit, I feel, than when we were with Crown Lands. Brett Whitworth is our DepSec, so that's another change. We have a DepSec all of our own, and that's a really important and significant change for OLG. Unfortunately, Brett's on leave at the moment, on family leave. His wife passed away a couple of weeks ago, tragically. So, and Gail Connolly is our acting DepSec. So many of you will know Gail. She was General Manager at Georges River and other councils. So look, that's been a big change for us, and we're very happy with the direction that's going in. It's fair to say, however, that all bets are off coming into the election. So we go into caretaker mode next week. I think it's the 9th of March. That means for us, hopefully things will be quiet for a few weeks. Then they'll be super busy, of course, depending on whether the government's returned or we get a new government. We're working very hard to prepare briefs for an incoming government, whatever colour that is. Yeah, so that's taking up a lot of our energy at the moment. Code of conduct review, obviously. There's quite a lot to come out of that, but again, nothing will happen now until after the election. What else is there? I think audit and risk, I'm happy to take any questions on that. Other than that, yeah, there's not a lot from us, and there won't be much until after the election, but I'm happy to take questions on anything.
Thanks, Karen. I'm covering off the risk management and or audit guidelines a bit later in my session. So, we can, I think we'll be coming back to do some more work on that in coming weeks and months as a group.
Yep.
Does anyone have any particular questions for Karen? All right. Okay, I'll call it there. So thank you, Karen. Thanks. I appreciate the effort to drop in while you're on the road. I appreciate how difficult that is when you're constantly traveling around the state. So have a good day. Be safe on the road.
Thank you. Right. And I'm happy to take any questions on notice if things come up during the day. I'm sorry I can't stay for the whole thing. It just happened that I needed to drop everything and do a bit of a visit. But yeah, so anything that comes up, just let me know. Happy to chat about it afterwards.
Okay, great.
Cheers.
Thank you, Karen. All
Bye.
Right. Thank you. See ya. All right, well, we'll move on. The next session we've got is on the special rate variation process. So Jenny Gleeson from North Sydney is just going to give us a quick overview and update to the session and introduce our speakers, and we'll go from there. Over to you, Jenny.
Hello, hi. North Sydney's had its fair share of SRVs, but thankfully today we're here to learn from some other councils. We're going to hear from 2 Greater Sydney councils and 1 Metro. We're going to learn about their experiences that I think are applicable no matter what size your council is. These experiences are ranging from the continuation of an existing time-limited special levy, an amalgamated council, and also a unique one where a council has decided ultimately not to apply for an SRV following the community consultation. But all of that links back to IPNR. So just to start with, and I thought we can also come back to these few slides at the end in context of any questions that you have for our panelists, who are Ross from Blacktown City Council, Sharon from Central Coast Council, and Peter from Randwick City Council. So use the chat function, put in any questions that you might have during their presentations, and then we'll circle back. So this slide is just showing the timetable as IPART, the decision-making body, sees it for both the special variation being the top timeline and the timeline at the bottom being the minimum rate increase. So your council might not be applying for an SRV, but may be applying just to increase the minimum rate or vice versa. So as you can see, they're currently simultaneous, and the councils has to make a decision before the end of the calendar year and apply by the February for an SRV that would start from 1 July the following financial year. So I just thought, for those not familiar with the process, we just sort of start with what it means for IPART and the application process. But what you'll see in the presentations is what does it mean for an individual council and the lessons learned for doing the necessary pre-planning to factor in sufficient time for yourselves. So we'll move on to the next one, where just to set the scene, I've just summarised the assessment criteria as IPART has it on their website, which does come from OLG guidelines. So it's really essential that if you're applying for an SRV, that you're very familiar with what you will be assessed against. And it clearly states in there that you have to have strong linkages with your IPNR plans from both the CSP right through delivery program to the resourcing strategy and long-term financial plan, and they must be something that the community can see and understand as well, and that includes your various financial scenarios for the long-term financial plan. So we can cover those in more detail through the presentations and any questions that people have, but I like number 6. It's a little bit of potluck, I guess, for each year as to what are the other relevant factors that IPART thinks need to be considered in that year's decision making. So the next one is just a summary of the quick tips that IPART requires, is making sure that you're fully communicating what it is that you're applying for so that it's easily understood by the community. And they consider the community to be both ratepayers who are directly impacted, but also residents, the wider community that will benefit from the increase. So they make sure that you don't just put it in daily or weekly terms. The old analogy of what it equates to in a cup of coffee is not sufficient. You need to make sure that you definitely spell it out in dollars and percentages and show the cumulative increase. I can say that one of the examples we've had in the past, we didn't do that as well as we could have. And then they made us do an extra part of consultation before we were able to get a second part of our approval. You need to make sure you state whether it's temporary or a permanent increase. You need to adequately show what the special variation would fund. And you need to use a variety of appropriate engagement methods to ensure that a cross-section of the community you can demonstrate back that they're aware of the need for and the extent of the rate rise. So that's just a good way to summarise the key things that you need to make sure that your engagement will be covering off on to best inform your application. The next slide is just going over the minimum rate, which does have probably a lesser application form, less intense one to the SRV. But again, it's the same information that you need to be able to demonstrate that there's been adequate consultation and the strong links back to your IPNR documents. And the last one's also equally important. If you've been successful and you've got approval for an SRV or a minimum rate increase, it's about reporting. So IPART will issue an instrument that outlines the conditions of approval, and then through the annual report, you must publicly disclose how much money has been raised and how that money has been funded. So there's not a firm prescription on exactly how you need to do that, and it can be integrated into however you're doing your existing report, or it could be an appendix to your plan. So how you do that has a bit of flexibility, but it's in the interest of transparency. All right, so we're going to hand over to Ross first, and he's going to share with us his experiences. Thanks, Ross.
Morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm driving the presentation directly. And I don't think that worked. So bear with me for the first technical stuff up. Apologies for that. Is the screen sharing going okay now?
Yes, thanks. Good work, Ross. Thanks.
Thank you. Folks, I've got a fair number of slides, but I will skim through most of them and just try to make some relevant points. As Jenny mentioned, we're the interesting case study of a council that did not proceed with an SRV application this year, although we had every intention of doing so up to a point. So let's see what sense I can make of that. Blacktown is the largest council by population in New South Wales. And we have 54 suburbs and the majority of Sydney's northwest growth area. So we're big, we're growing rapidly. We've got the challenges of growth as well as, of course, older established suburbs. We've also got some of the most disadvantaged suburbs in Australia. So it's an area with lots of complexity and challenges. Population's over 400,000 and will grow by at least 200,000 in the next 20 years. So huge and growing. One key piece of information, which I won't go into in detail, is the extent of our asset maintenance requirements and the growing gap between what we're currently spending on asset maintenance, what we're able to spend within our existing means, and the future needs of that area is a big part of the challenge for us. Everyone knows this, so I won't read it or dwell on it. Financial challenges which are largely common to all of local government. Everyone knows this as well, really, and we will all say that we've worked hard on business efficiencies, cost savings, living within our means, and all of the sanctimonious statements that we would get from the government or IPAR. Unfortunately, that doesn't really cut it under the system of rate pegging, which has been in New South Wales for what, 45 years. It's increasingly difficult for councils to live within their means while fulfilling their function under the Local Government Act and providing good services to their community, as you know. I will make a couple of points on this slide. For councils who are for growth councils in New South Wales, the rate peg poses particular challenges because there are additional costs when you have a new suburb coming online. It's not like maintaining services to existing areas. So in recent times, those not as familiar with this, I apologise if it's complex to explain. A couple of years ago, the growth factor was added to the rate peg system in New South Wales to compensate growth councils, allegedly. Blacktown City, despite being one of the fastest growing areas in Australia, received 0% population growth factor in the rate peg for last year and this year. Why, I won't try and explain this morning, but our reality was we got nothing out of that growth factor. So pressures on our financial sustainability increased. And the last point is one that I've had fun trying to explain to community meetings on a proposed special rate variation. Each new property currently added to council is a net cost. We don't get more relative income because we're growing in properties. They cost us more. What I should have put on this slide, and I'll just say to you, is the fundamental purpose of our proposed special rate variation is, or was, financial sustainability. So, and there's the figures in net terms. We need at least $20 million to become additional income for financial sustainability across a range of areas, including unavoidable cost increases. But asset maintenance was the biggest part of our proposal. And an interesting one was income to invest in business efficiency and customer experience. We hoped to get more out of the SRV as well for that purpose, and all the things which are to improve the place and to improve our services. What was the scale of our increase was pretty modest. So as Jenny rightly said, you're no longer allowed to say a cup of coffee a week, which is what we would have said. And what councillors in fact did say, but it was for most of our residential ratepayers, it was about $200 a year. And for pensioners, we already have the most generous voluntary pensioner rebate outside the City of Sydney. And we were going to increase that further to mitigate the rise for pensioners. For businesses, it was a bit more. Get to the more important slides to discuss with you the timeline for our SRV proposal and process. First point to make is that all of those dates you're seeing are within 2022. So it's essentially an 8-month process there, which is far too short. So I'll come back to that point. But Council considering and approving the need for an SRV, and ultimately only in late September endorsing the proposal for consultation. Earlier in the year, as many of us know, IPART first of all produced a ridiculous 0.7% rate peg proposal, and then was forced by the government to backtrack on that, but did that by a complex and unnecessary process called additional special variation, which last year muddied the waters nicely. So trying to explain to new councillors elected in 2021 the difference between an ASV and an SRV and any other acronyms that we had like IPNR was not a lot of fun. Anyway, we got to the point of council endorsing a proposal for an SRV and went to consultation. We did perhaps all the things that you would expect us to do to satisfy the community consultation criterion that Jenny mentioned before. And the cost of all this was over $200,000 for us. We provided a mail out to every ratepayer. We also e-blasted every email address we had on our databases. We ran a statistically valid citywide survey as well as opt-in surveys, meetings, videos, and so on. Results of our consultation, we were very successful, and my IPNR team is online at the moment who endured the results of our success here, over 2,500 submissions in a 3-week period, which were not terribly supportive of our SRV proposal. In fact, 98% opposed. A interesting stat is that we got 900 submissions online in 24 hours after we went out with the main email blast about the SRV. It was an unlucky year perhaps to have an SRV proposal. Come back to that in a moment. The structured survey that we did run showed a higher level of support for the SRV, not a majority, but a better understanding when people were read over the phone a script about what it was all about and asked choices, rather than just being able to click no effectively on an email. Anyway, on the 26th of October, Council resolved formally to discontinue our SRV process. The learnings that we could take from this, many of these are, I guess, obvious, or we probably knew in advance. Although it felt like we did a lot, we did too little and certainly too late. For other councils that we did consult along the way in developing our proposal and our process, had often spent a couple of years leading up to an SRV proposal. We did not do that. We kind of knew that we needed to, but we didn't have permission to do that until last year. There was a line of sight in our IPNR documents adopted last June, but there was not a specific communication program or consultation until late September, October last year. The consultation period, it was really only a month between council meetings, to put it that way, to meet the IPART deadline. And so it came to the community as a big bang rather than as something which had been led up to and explained properly over a period of time. We can certainly say that direct email was the #1 communication method that achieved an effect. Unfortunately, it's very easy to go from an email to clicking no on the submission screen. Much harder to engage in a discussion and explain and get people to look at the information. The timing last year was pretty unlucky in terms of inflation taking off, interest rates taking off, and that ASV confusion. So what do we do now that we don't have an SRV this year and council's ruled out at this point in time applying for an SRV? And we don't have any definite time frame for when we might come back to that, if we do. We told the community last year, in effect, that we were not financially sustainable. We told council that, of course. We told the community that. So what's changed? Nothing has changed for the better. And since then, there are a number of other factors, such as West Invest, which I won't discuss today, which probably make our challenges substantially more than they were before. But what our next steps are is yet to be determined. We've been for a number of years basically balancing the budget by expedients, band-aids, blunt instruments, sort of across the board, 1% cuts and the like, as well as genuine efficiencies and changes. But the challenge there remains for us, and now we do not have an SRV process. So that was our experience. Thank you, and I'll stop sharing my screen. Happy to take any questions at, later in the session.
Thanks, Ross. There's nothing in the chat at the moment, but a reminder to use the chat function to pop in any questions. So we're going to move over to Sharon from Central Coast Council.
Hello, everybody. Let me just get my screen sharing. Can everybody, is that working? Can you see the presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Right, okay.
Yes, we
About
can
now.
We can
Okay.
now, thanks.
Great, thank you. So hi everybody. So Sharon from Central Coast Council. So today just wanted to share some experiences that we went through with our rate variation and hopefully some tips to help you guys. It's very much sort of, it might seem quite obvious and you'll probably already be doing it, but just wanted to share how it worked for us and why it was so important. So first thing, just wanted to go through project scoping and the planning, and then engagement. So not just with the external, but with our internal stakeholders, and then just the execution of all of that. So firstly, just going through the project scoping and the planning, you know, as I said, quite obvious, you know, having that project group and setting up that governance structure, it really helped us. So we had a project sponsor, we had a project manager. Our rate variation was to do with financial management and being financially sustainable. So our sponsor for that was quite obviously the CFO, and then our project manager was the manager for community engagement. You know, a part of that group, we had a project group, so there was about 7 members within that group, and you know, everybody had a function and a role and responsibility within the group. So we had people from rates, finance to do the LTFP, people from community engagement, myself for the IPNR documents, and then also some administration assistants to help us with the application and any sort of minute writing and report writing. Next was the timeline. So, I mean, we work in IPNR, we deal with timelines all the time. So you guys will be very familiar that you should have a timeline. I guess the key thing here was to plan backwards, and that we included everything. So we started backwards, looking at our documents to be adopted in June, working through exhibition, like when did we have to get the application to IPART, when was the determination going to be released by IPART? So we included all of that. And the other thing to note as well, though, is any other things that are going on within the organisation that might have an impact on your SRV. So, for instance, for us, we were also doing the water, sewer and stormwater pricing determination. So we made sure that their aspects were included in our timeline, just so we could make sure if there was any crossovers, duplications, or where we could share messaging, we did. So they weren't part of our project team, they were a separate project team, but we made sure that we included their milestones and their activities in ours, and the same that they did with us, and we communicated in that way. So with our IPNR documents, I've got there that it's, obviously we have to include the purpose of why we're applying for an SRV into our IPNR documents, but what does that actually mean? So for us, we actually did the entire suite of IPNR documents. So we went through and sort of determined, okay, well, what does that actually look like? What does that mean? Because our application was based on financial management and sustainability. So with the community strategic plan, we looked at that and we realised it didn't have sort of that aspect around financial management and making sure we were responsible with our finances. So we determined that we would do revisions to it, but also we had to kind of project plan for the return of councillors and when we had that local government election. So we sort of had to plan out our comprehensive review of the CSP. So we had to map out, okay, for phase one, we're just going to do minor revisions and it's based on the financial sustainability of the organisation and making sure we're capturing the feedback from the community. Obviously, because of the financial situation, we had a lot of community information and engagement data that we could use to build into our community strategic plan. So that was quite good. We also had a community reference group as well with our revisions to the community strategic plan. Obviously, it's a community document, so we had to make sure that we were engaging with our community. And I think the thing to note with our one is, and I don't recommend this, but we had just an extraordinarily short time frame. So we started doing this in September, and as you saw in the timeline, your applications need to be submitted by February. So we actually did engagement in December, which, as I said, don't recommend it, but we did what we had to do to make sure that everything was completed as part of the SRV process and making sure that we could put our application in on time. And so just communicating, just having that community reference group helped us meet our sort of community expectations. Also noting, though, we did several exhibitions. So because obviously we're putting stuff on exhibition in December, it's not ideal, it's Christmas, it's holiday period. We made sure that we did another exhibition after we got the SRV determination. So with our delivery program and operational plan, we are under administration. So, we sort of talked about whether or not we do a delivery program or just do another operational plan. We decided, no, it's best to do the delivery program. So do the 4-year program. And part of that was making sure that we included that SRV information in the document. I mean, you can choose to just have a section on the SRV, but for us, we had information scattered throughout just because it meant so many different things because of the financial management side. How could that change things in the program? And then lastly, with our resourcing strategy, that was sort of, as you know, the LTFP, it has to be done annually anyway. So we included that. But then the workforce management strategy, that had actually concluded. So we knew that we had to do a new 4-year workforce management strategy. But with the asset management strategy, it was only minor revisions, and it was to the point where it's only sort of facts and figures that change. And we noted that a full review and a full rewrite would be done when we had a local government election. And so, sorry, the other thing to note, as I said, these documents, we went out, we had several exhibitions. So these documents changed a lot through that process because we obviously had to communicate the SRV. We made sure that with our exhibition, any submissions that we received, we were able to sort of update the documents before they were adopted to include that sort of feedback. And then again, after we got the SRV, it was sort of, okay, well, we were successful in getting it. So now we had to sort of take out all of that SRV information and sort of communicate it in a different way. So that was quite timely and sort of making sure that we were including the right messaging for each of those different documents. And then just the last point there is just research. So, I mean, look at other council applications and reach out to those other councils. So, and we did. So it was really great. I mean, we live in IPNR world and we love to share. So I think, you know, we actually, people shared with us their community engagement information and other internal documents, which actually helped us to do our application and also our IPNR documents. So moving on to engagement, as I said, it's not just about external engagement, but also internal. But with the external engagement, just developing that community messaging early. And, you know, with our one, as I said, it was the financial situation. We had a lot of upset community members, and they were very vocal about it. So it was about, okay, well, we know that they're vocal about it. They're already telling us what they're upset about. So let's make sure that we have our messaging to address that. And I guess the good thing with the messaging is that it's stuff that we could just copy and paste into our documents, but just be careful when you are doing that, that it's fitting within your document. So, you know, you always still have to read the messaging, and making sure that it's actually fitting and it's appropriate for the documents that you're creating. The internal stakeholders, so, you know, in particular, making sure your executive and your managers are informed of, you know, the process, the timeline, all of that, and where they fit in the timeline. So obviously we need information from them to create our documents, but also we needed information from them to do the application. So they were kind of on alert. So keeping those lines of communication open, and so that they could understand when we would be coming for them, not coming for them, that's a bit harsh, but when we would be asking for information, it just made it that much easier. And so execution of all of this. So we had project group meetings on a weekly basis, and it did change. So as we were kind of getting to those milestone points, like when we were due to put things out on exhibition or put the application in itself, we were sometimes meeting on a daily basis, even hourly. It really did help to meet on that weekly basis and that more regular basis, just so that we could tackle any issues that might come out of the woodwork quickly. And, you know, we all had actions to play within those meetings. So if there was something going on and we had an action to do, we would go out of those meetings and execute it quite quickly, so that it was sort of, we could keep going on with the application process and it wasn't holding us up. And I think just with the group meetings as well, so we're all quite familiar with like Zoom and Teams. We use Teams, and we actually had a file sharing area on the Teams site. So all of our documents were included in that, and we could edit those documents. It was quite easy. You know, you could chat about things on there. So the communication lines are constantly open, even if we weren't having those group meetings. Second point there is really the IPART portal. So know the IPART portal, get to know it. There is there is a size attachment limitation on it. So I think it's about 70 meg. It could have changed since then, but this is important to know because, you know, instinctively you'll want to just upload your full IPNR documents, but you won't be able to. They might be too large. So you'll have other attachments. And so you need to just make sure of that, because we had to do excerpts, and with ours, our information was scattered throughout the document. So it wasn't that we just had it in one section and we could just do an excerpt and just upload that to the portal. We had to actually kind of mindfully do this, and it, you know, this takes time. So it's just about making sure that you know that portal and being prepared for it. And then the last point there is just to stick together. It was quite intense at times, and you know, there was times where, and we'd just gone through a restructure, you know, there was redundancies, all of that. So the organisation wasn't at its best state. So, and it was a stressful time trying to get the SRB completed. So there was times where it was intense, and even in the meetings, like some of us would just burst into tears because we were just so exhausted. So I think having the project group meeting really helped with keeping us going. And so we just try and make each other laugh and keep each other going. The executive and managers did want to help as much as they can, but Really, it was about less cooks in the kitchen. So the more people that we had to help wasn't actually going to help it, because it was there was such little different components that we need to keep a track of, and it was best to just keep it within the project group. But yeah, so definitely stick to the plan. If you do stick to the plan, you will get through it. And last slide is really just to keep calm when you are doing your SRV. That's it from me.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great. Thank you. So we are starting to get some questions in the chat, which we'll get to after we hear from Peter from Randwick. So please keep the questions coming. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Isabel. I'm glad you're driving this. I'm just listening to Sharon and Ross there, and I'm having a triggering kind of impact on the previous SRVs. My name's Peter McGarnoff. I'm the Manager of Sustainability, and I guess tongue-in-cheek or not, I think that the first slide there almost represents some of those emotional kind of feelings you have in taking on the SRV process. And this is about our experience, journeys / slog, and it is a slog. It's obviously got major issues. I'm glad to hear from the previous two speakers. We actually had our first briefing of the councillors towards the end of last year for our SRV that expires in June 2024. So, perhaps we're starting early enough, but, nothing's guaranteed in the various steps in this process. Thanks, Isabel. This is our story of 5 SRVs over 20 years. The main SRV is our environmental levy program, and that has been renewed on 4 occasions every 5 years. And if you look at the next one there, Isabel, as you can see there, the 5-year environmental levy, which was the purpose behind our SRV applications, has continued on that 5-yearly basis. But in 2013, you sort of wonder at the rationale of council or the courage of council and councillors and management at the time, but they also applied for a building for our community's special rate variation as well. And that was a year before the next environmental levy. And maybe speaking honestly in the audience that we have today, that process really put at risk the continuation of the environmental levy. The BFOC levy, as it was known, was looking at a 7-year levy that would discontinue after that time frame to look at the infrastructure issue. And the residents that were asked to consider that were supportive of the infrastructure. We were starting with our life-saving clubs and other buildings. And IPART approved that and noted in the approval that at least there would be rate relief when the environmental levy ran out at the end of the year after. And then we put in that, and we had said it in the small print, if you like, that we're likely to reapply for the environmental levy the year after. But the feedback from many residents in that 5-year application was, if we'd known about the environmental levy continuing the year after BFOC, they wouldn't have supported it. So it was a precarious situation in that 3rd levy period for us, but we managed to get it through. And I might just reflect on a few things that perhaps made the difference there, because I think it goes out to the community consultation and how you keep your stakeholders on side. So next slide, please. This is what we've heard about already, but just a few internal reflections, I guess, on this was, unlike Blacktown, the council decided very early internally that it was going to seek an SRV, and that the SRV purposefully was focusing on environmental projects and environmental funding. And then that was taken to council, and they formally agreed to start the process, including the community consultation. And we we've had different approaches to the community consultation, and I guess one good example of a variation we had was and I saw in the chat there, we had a similar process where we ran some deliberative democratisation workshops where we paid people who'd been not hunted down, but sourced through a particular company that was good at finding representatives of the community that don't normally talk to us. And we offered them a payment to come along to some workshops. And in those workshops, we presented to them what the environmental levy, as it was known, had been providing in terms of benefits and its focus, and the framework behind it, which came through the community strategic plan. But we looked at the results and the focus of the outcomes, and the process or the outcomes of those workshops, I think, swayed the councillors when it came to the crunch, because the survey, as Ross is pointing out, it's pretty easy to say no. It's a very reactive kind of set of questions that you can find people responding to. It's just another increase in the rates, and to try and get the information around why and what you're going to do with it, or in our case, what we've done with it previously, really needed to be spelled out in the range of documents you exhibited. Anyway, the rest is all part of the machine. The process is that you take that to IPART by council meeting. They look at the community consultation results. In our case, I think most years it's been between 49 and 51% consistently as to people against and for it, being 51%. I think IPART's more interested in the process, and that you've gone to the extreme degree of communicating, and they're not as concerned as the councillors might be what that split in support is. And obviously the councillors are closer to the ground, and there are some opportunities that we had in there to try and sway them at the last council meeting. If we go to the next slide. Thanks, Isabel. I think this one reflected the more long-term approach that the organisation took to this, and it was a whole of council process. Obviously you've got your comms team and your finance team being crucial to this, but we went out to all the managers and the teams and identified the environmental projects in this case that we're going to try and look to fund under environmental levy if it was successful. And at the same time as identifying the important new projects, finance had to demonstrate how it was being efficient in its other budgetary expenditure. And, are you making savings elsewhere? Are you being very efficient in the way the budget is allocated to other costs for council? That project identification really is essential, because you're trying to get the staff on side and then communicate it to councillors as to the necessity of it. So there's a fair bit of detail attached to the future projects or the results of projects that have been undertaken. I'll have to point out that the communications manager was the person that was asked to present today, and I think he told Jenny that this whole question was triggering the sorts of reflections that I think Sharon pointed out there too, and he just couldn't bear thinking about the next levy at this stage, even though we have started that process last year for next year's deadline that we have to meet here. You cannot go to too much communication with your residents. I wouldn't be doing a community satisfaction equivalent type survey. I think the workshops with the residents are just critical to trying to convince the councillors when it comes to the crunch. And don't forget, IPART exhibits for community input as well. So if you've got people that are talking against the levy to council, they will also have the opportunity to say the same things to IPART. And you've really got to try and swing as many people as possible to be positive about why council's argument is appearing sound. The consultation results that were taken to council, it really did cause quite a stir amongst the different parts of the council makeup. And again, having briefings with the councillors beforehand from your management team, from the finance people, from the IPNR and the sustainability, or in a way the project managers of the various projects, is really an opportunity for them to air their concerns early and try and have the answers provided that mean when it comes to the crunch, they'll still support it in a way. And I think, you know, we've been lucky in one sense, because we've gone out and our story to our residents is we're continuing the previous levy. It's not a new levy. It's a real grey area to try and bank or bet on, but a lot of people were obviously going, oh, it's a new tax, new on the rates. We're not going to support it. We're already being hit too much, and all the usual arguments that you get against this. But you're really aiming to try and convince the councillors that enough of the community is supporting this for them to support this and not sort of see something down the track in terms of the election cycle that's, you know, going to make them sway or not. The interesting thing we had at our councillors with the various party groupings that you have in each council is that everyone, well, no, not everyone, sorry, at least half the council performed against the approval of the levy submission going to IPART, and yet when it came to the vote, not one of them voted against it. So they did need to, you know, have it put on record, but for, you know, their own reasons, when it came to the vote, they realised either that the results and the community and the need were compelling enough for it to go through to IPART as supported by council. Sharon pointed out that the documentation you've got to put in and the financials are just so detailed that you've really got to have time to amend and fix them, and then make sure that they provide exactly the right level of information. Oh, they will help out and be of assistance in the process. Anyway, next slide. So why would you go through all that? Why would you put your staff and your organisation and yourself through this? Well, the next slide sums it up for us. And, you know, I honestly am not saying this to gloat at all, but, you know, first levy 5-year timeframe got about 10 million. Second 5-year was 12. Building for our communities was 35 million over 7 years. And then the last 2 5-year levy periods, again, 16 and $20 million. That gives you some pretty crucial funding, in our case, to focus on sustainability and environmental improvements. There's no way that you should see that as going to other areas, but if you've got that focus and you can identify the projects, it's really obviously beneficial. So the why is not that hard. It's just really the process you've got to battle through. And something I didn't add in there is that the leverage it's given us for external grants is when you identify your projects, you know, you can actually have matching funds available ahead of time when some of these Commonwealth and state government grants are advertised. So it gives, we got the leverage of more than $12 million as well in external grants. And I think that's it. I'll just leave it for comments and questions as well. But what I might flag is, you know, when you're looking at $1 million, a few $1 million a year, we've been investing in projects now for a long period of time that have got results. And I'll just sort of highlight that, you know, which is a huge project for us. We've had between $400,000 and $600,000 a year available for a combination of water savings and renewable energy. And one of the great results that we hold up now is 60 to 70% of our operational water is from non-potable treated stormwater. And our last system that we put in most recently is $5.1 million underground system, which was really paid for mostly from the environmental levy over time. We have about $400,000 for community engagement and education on sustainability. We've developed, as some of you would know, our sustainability education hub down here. and it just makes obviously all the difference. So that slog that's triggered for me at the beginning of this session, you know, is obviously beneficial if you can work through all those processes and get the council on side and keep the councillors informed and comfortable enough so that when you finish all that effort, they'll support what you're doing as it goes to IPART. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that. And thank you to all our panelists, Sharon and Ross as well. There are some questions in the chat. How are we doing for time? It's 11:02 on my clock and we're due for a break. There's sort of two questions I can see that are for Ross. Ricky's asked about going through a similar process regarding the cost of new properties and calculating those. And Prue made a statement about her experience. And then there's a question from Louise about when the SRV is perpetual, do you still need to separate it out in your reports? I shared our experience there, in which we only reported on the program of works for the period of the SRV plus the subsequent year after that for any unfunded works, because that's what our instrument told us we had to do. So, and then Nicole's made a comment about if we're asking residents and ratepayers to fork out additional money, looking for the internal efficiencies and cost reductions to complement that. And then there's a question about when the slides will be available. So maybe Ross, can you take the question with Ricky offline or and maybe put something in the chat for everyone later in the session?
Yes, happy to do that.
Thank you. And that last one about the slides, there'll be, I'm assuming, Isabel, yeah, I'm getting a nod from Jeff that they'll be sent out to everybody following the session.
Yes, I will send out the slides to everyone, and we'll also have an opportunity for a Q&A at the very end, so we can definitely.
Perfect. So keep the chat questions coming for SRV as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again to Ross, Sharon, and Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for that. Thanks for hosting that session. Thanks for our speakers. So we're going to have a quick, what we said was 10-minute break. So let's aim for 10 minutes or less, just to give you an option to stretch your legs, grab something or do something else. So we'll see you back here at 11:15. I'll be starting at 11:15 on the dot. All right. Thank you. See you soon. Okay, good morning. Hope you're all back online. So I might kick off the next session just to make sure we've got enough time. So this next session is around preparing for the next round of IPR. I thought it was a good opportunity to outline what the next bigger IPR activities are, rather than wait till kind of when it feels like we've got no time to think about it. Thought there might be some value in providing an overview of the key dates and obligations over the next few years, so you can start planning now to start planning for the next round of IPR, if that all kind of makes sense. So I'm going to cover off the timeline and obligations for IPR, what we need to do in the next 6 months and things you can do in the next 6 months, and then covering off the longer term for the 24-25 suite of IPR documents, and just touching base on some of the new obligations as well. So if you've got questions as we go along, Jenny Donaldson from Lake Macquarie will be monitoring the chat. So thank you for that, Jenny. But we'll kick off into the presentation now. Hopefully you can all see my slides. So current context, sometimes it does feel like our jobs are just one merry-go-round after the other. You finish one plan and you start the next plan, and then you're doing reporting, and it's just a constant cycle. Our current cycle is being shortened due to the postponement of the elections. And then our next round of IPR feels somewhat a lot closer than it normally would. And there are some new requirements that we need to address. So you should all be familiar with the obligations of IPR, so no need to talk to this. But in terms of the timeline, I thought it would be useful just to lay out what are those obligations and the timeframes for those. So the purple represents the current suite of IPR that we're in at the moment. And then our first kind of new deadline is from the 1st July 2024, when the new audit risk guidelines take effect, and I'll be talking to that later on. 14th of September 2024 is the next council election. Second council meeting after that, State of the City Shire report, and then July 1, 2025, the new delivery program commences. And then we've got the next round of elections, 9th of September 2028, if you can even contemplate thinking out that far at this stage. All right, so there's two new kind of requirements coming into play with this current round. As I said, the State of the Shire or the City replaces the end of term report, so it's slightly different report and focus. And then we should be reporting on service reviews and how we're doing that, reporting on our progress. So two new things to consider. As I said before, we always feel like we're on a merry-go-round. There's an annual obligations of progress reporting, developing operational plans and doing an annual report. But then I'm talking about irregular, and if anyone's got a better name, I'm happy for them to come up with it, about those things that come up every so often, such as the community strategic plan, delivery program, and the State of the Shire and City report. We've also got some new obligations coming through, the audit risk guidelines. There's always other issues on our plate. I've just mentioned a couple that might be coming through. OLG talking about performance framework, IPART with their rate peg, changing the methodology, IPART and competitive neutrality. If anyone's across that, they've issued a draft report, and there may be others coming down the line. Who knows what happens after the election in March. There's always local issues, whether it's a SRV, as we've discussed this morning. You might be going through a demerger, or the council might be in administration or have a performance order. All these things can have a local impact on how you do your IPR. So I thought it'd be useful just to quickly go through the current obligations for those that are new to the sector. I won't go through this in detail. I'll leave it here for you to read through. But it's useful just to start thinking around your annual report now. It does feel like it's a long time away, but just sketch out what council meeting you're probably going to be going to. Make sure you've got enough time to hit all your internal deadlines to get to that council meeting. So in terms of next year, 23-24, the obligations are to create an operational plan, a delivery program review, and also review the long-term financial plan which would be quite critical in this current financial and economic climate. And there's a few things I've called a check that you can start to think about for next year that aren't necessarily part of the IPR plans or documents, but more around the processes or practices that we've got internally. So are you still going to be reporting 3 monthly or every 6 months? Are you changing any processes? Are you implementing a new system perhaps, or maybe changing systems? Have you got new staff coming, or have you got staff leaving? Do you have new counsellors? Do you need to prepare an induction pack? Things like that. You start thinking around how you provide information for new staff coming into the organisation. Also talking around the data. Census data is gradually being released, so making sure that you've got the current census data and it's available for you to include. And in some cases, getting the most accurate population data can be quite tricky. If you've got any other great tips, pop them in the chat. All right, so state of the city or the shire or the town, whatever we can call that report as appropriate for your council. As I said, replaces the end of term report. It needs to go in the annual report business paper, which is also in November. So need to make sure you've got your timing correct there. OLG released the Good, Better, Best maturity framework in the guidelines. So it's a good place to start thinking around what the report could look like. Don't underestimate how hard this may be. So the earlier you start thinking around what it could look like and get endorsement for that will be a bonus for you down the track. OLG were kind enough to provide a table of contents example as well. And that's also in the guidelines. So I'll call this a quick quiz, the State of the Shire quick quiz. That's a bit of a tongue twister, but really by the end of this calendar year, you probably want to be thinking around what format will you have for the report? Will you have the data and how will you get it? Who will supply it? And you know when it will be available? How will you demonstrate progress against your delivery program goals? Will it be narrative? Will you use graphics? Will you use numbers? Will you use all three? Try to understand how you'll be able to tell your story to the community and, more importantly, to the incoming councillors. Will you have a community profile? Will it be up to date? Who will supply that? And also the local strategic planning statement. There should be some metrics in that level of reporting and planning that maybe you can use as well. So maybe that's an avenue that you can use from perhaps another part of council to get that information for you. All right, so the next big round of IPR, as I call it, kicks off with the election in September 2024. This next CSP starts from the 1st of July 25, the DP at the same time, and that'll end on the 30th of June 2029. And the council is to review the CSP by the 30th of June and or develop and endorse a new CSP by 30th of June 2025. So preparing, a couple of questions here. Check off your list. Is your CSP end date 10 years or more from the end of the next DP? So what's the timing of your current CSP? Will it expire by the end of your next DP round? When was the last major revision you had with the community? Sometimes we find that we do community engagement, we do a big round of engagement, and then we do a subsequent review for maybe a cycle or two. So it's always mindful to check in when was the last big piece of community engagement with the community. A lot of these things you can start before the election, so don't wait until council is elected and then say, okay, now we need to start to review our CSP. There is a number of things you can do to start beforehand. And don't forget about the local strategic planning statement. I think we were talking about this earlier this week. So a lot of councils are now starting to align their LSPS with their CSP and DP kind of review periods. So maybe that's an option for you, or maybe this year the LSPS is up for review. I've lost track of when all the councils have had their timing and reviews, but don't forget about it. There is some, I think, some obvious crossovers that you can, and advantages you can gain by doing it at the same time. Also think about that age-old question. Are you going to combine your delivery program with the operational plan or keep them separate? Do you have a SRV on the horizon? As you saw from our presenters earlier today, timing and pre-planning is so vital. So to understand what the volume of work and level of engagement is quite critical to putting together all these plans. And the best advice, I guess, is to come up with a plan internally, test it with a few other colleagues, and then speak to your general manager and executive and get them to endorse that broad plan for the next 2 years around these type of things, around whether you're doing large amount of engagement, because you'd be doing budgets now. Are you going to combine your DP and OP? What's the LSPS up to? All right, so in terms of content, so we talked about the process, now we're talking about content for the next round. There's some things you can start to do now. Do you have a register of all your current strategies for your council? Do you have it in one place or not? Because they're a vital source of content for your plans. Are there any strategies being developed now, or are some being retired now? Do you know? So the other key thing is to understand where your current actions are in your current DP. Will they be completed in time for the next review, or will they be lingering over? There's also always a new theme coming into, certainly our documents anyway, about new issues that are emerging from the community point of view. For us, the last time around, it was closing the gap commitments. Prior to that, it was climate change goals and resilient actions and resilient planning. So these elements for us were quite made an impact on our documents late in the stage, but having an understanding of those earlier would have allowed us to incorporate them a lot better. And of course, the Disability Inclusion Action Plan is the other one to certainly include on the IPR. So thank you, Alison, for that comment on the chat. So what about external obligations? So I'm not going to try and resolve the issues of world famine and peace, but we need to understand what the global conditions are when we do even our local planning. And so this is borrowed from the state government, and you can go through this at your leisure when the slides come out. But importantly is understanding the state plans and regional plans. We are obligated under the Act to look at the state plans, and I guess that's evidenced by the priorities of the Premier. You can find them on the Premier's Priorities website, and also in the state government plans. So for years, we've been trying to understand what plans of the state we should be linking into. Here's an example of some of them from a couple of years ago. OLG have a list on their website. If you can, if you remember where that is, this is the list. But I've also started working out my own list internally. So we'll keep working on that list, and maybe we'll see if we can share that list over the next 6 months if we can build, or if anyone else has got a list, maybe you can share that as well. We can put that in the LinkedIn group as a thought. So new obligations, risk management, internal audit. So OLG released a series of guidelines and background documents in December. The document is labeled draft, but legislation, they say, is to be passed in early 2023. And once that's passed, the draft then becomes final, and then the requirements are then enacted, ready for us to comply with from the 1st of July 2024. Not sure how many people are across this, but I'm quickly just going to go through the impact for IPR specifically. I'm not going to go through all the audit and risk and the other elements in that document, but really the guts of it is that the GM has to sign an attestation to the committee saying that they're complying with all the requirements of the guidelines. There's 3 particular elements that apply to IPR: strategic plan, service reviews and performance measurement. And what are they, I hear you ask? Let's go through them. So strategic planning. So the role of the audit committee will be to advise the general manager and the governing body of the council, the councillors, on the adequacy and effectiveness of the council's IPR processes. How would you respond when the GM walks into your area and says, so how can I prove that processes are adequate? I don't have that answer for you, but we need to start thinking about how we answer that and provide that evidence to the audit committee. Is adequate and effective, is it just compliance with the guidelines, which are evidenced by awareness by the senior managers? Do we use the good, better, best approach from the maturity assessment scale from the OLG? And what about a particular audit? So we've just gone through an audit here at the city on our IPR practices. So that's quite useful to have an independent assessment, pardon me, on our processes and our practices. Service reviews and business improvement, a specific requirement for that committee is to act as a forum around performance and the ability of council to deliver services, how it manages those services, and what are the levels of service for that council. So I think this is a new and potentially exciting piece of requirements that I think inevitably will flow into IPR, into our documents, and maybe into other documents internally, and maybe business plans or service plans. How do we document what our levels of service are? How do we document that we're complying with service reviews and improvement? And I'm sure the audit committees would then be saying, okay, we're investing with 3 people doing service reviews. What's our return on investment? What savings have we made? What's our potential improvements? I'm not sure what you guys think, but this is a piece of work I think will emerge over the next couple of months for us to think about how we respond. And lastly, I guess here is performance data and measurement. So the committee's role here is to make sure it's got a robust system about performance, creating, managing and reporting performance indicators to ensure that councils are delivering on their objectives. How do you demonstrate that we're delivering on our objectives? Not an easy task, but one we need to think about. I thought I'd just quickly identify some of the matchups around risk and IPR. A number of years ago, I think we had a chat around risk management and IPR and how it's kind of one side of the coin to the other. So you could look at IPR as a way of mitigating the risks to the community and the organisation through identifying objectives and making sure that we're delivering on those objectives and services to limit the risk and or exposure and to provide services to the community. So I've just kind of listed a couple of ideas. They're my ideas around how we might match up what risks are and how we might be able to demonstrate how we're managing those risks through an IPR lens. So early days on this, but you can think about asset management plans and asset management risks as easily going together in the same document. Workforce issues and workforce plans going together in the same document. I guess IPR and delivery program is around managing the community risk, the things that they see that they need to be managed and services that contribute to a better outcome. But we also need to think about the organisation as well. All right, so summary. I know I rushed through that fairly quickly, but you will get the slides and always happy to take questions on it later. But really it's a great time, even though we feel like we're probably in the middle of delivering budgets, or for some of you, you probably got your operational plan well and drafted, or maybe with council at the moment. But the next couple of months does give us a little bit of a period to think about next year. It's never too early to start, even if it's a sketch on a piece of paper. That's always a good place to start. Starting is a good step. Engaging with your executive team gives you the confidence that the next steps are not a surprise for the executive and you have their support. And it's also a great way to make sure that you're not missing out on some other strategic pieces of work like the LSPS or other internal strategies. Maybe it's an economic development strategy or community engagement on cultural or social issues. And start thinking around the ARIC guidelines. I'm sure we'll be doing more sessions on that in the coming months. All right, so fairly dry topic, I'm afraid. So this is the best cartoon or comic that I could come up with. So it's never too late, never too early, sorry, to start planning in terms of IPR. So happy to take any questions that we've got.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. There was a comment earlier on from Louise at City of Canada Bay just about linking operational plan to people development plans. Prue has asked a question about which councils have a documented performance measurement framework currently in place or are developing. We don't, but have commenced initial discussion on what this might look like or include, or is everyone waiting for OLG? And, you know, I know you said you rushed through it, but it was really comprehensive and there's some really great tips in there. So thank you.
Okay. In terms of performance framework, so I think there's two things here. One is the OLG are looking at a statewide performance framework. So they're trying to, I guess, have the same metrics or measures across the state for each council. But I would encourage you to think around an internal framework. Even again, if it's a sketch on a piece of paper, if you think about your CSPs delivering to outcomes, they're outcome measures. As you go through the hierarchy, so if you can picture the CSP at the top and then delivery program, operational plan, business unit plans and budgets as a hierarchy, and then even down to a personal work plan. The things that you focus on will always compress and be more detailed at the bottom, but that's a valid way to measure performance. We don't come to work and have the ability to measure, has unemployment gone up or down because I've mown the grass today. So there's services that we deliver that we need to manage the services. We need to make sure that they're effective and that they're efficient and the right measures for that. But as we move up towards a delivery program, we want to make sure that those kind of midterm measures or midterm outcomes are being documented. So I've got a little bit of a schematic on that I did many, many years ago. So I'm happy to share that on the LinkedIn after I do a bit of a refresh on it, if you like. It's something that we're looking at in the next 12 months as well, mainly because of the ARIC guidelines. We'll need to demonstrate that we've got a performance framework in place across the organisation. All right. Any other questions?
No other questions.
Good. My brain hurts now. All right. Hopefully that was of some value to you. Now we are a few minutes over in terms of our timing, but we're going to have a quick breakout session. So it's 11:38 now. So if we go for probably 15 minutes, so Isabel's going to throw us into breakout rooms. Really, it's just a kind of an ability to have a chat. If you want some prompting questions, how did you go with last year's IPR with the OLG guidelines and the handbook? Was there something in that you found you just couldn't understand? Were there elements that were too hard to understand? And are some things really, really challenging about that labour reporting? So there was a requirement in the annual report to put the number of staff on a particular day within the previous financial year. So happy for feedback like that. We won't have a formal report back session, but it's an opportunity for you to reach out to others in the network for 10, 15 minutes. All right, over to you, Isabel. All right, thank you. Thanks for that. Hope you had a good breakout session, as much as you can for a breakout session, I suppose. Next 5 minutes we've got is general business. So if anyone's got any general business or anything they want to raise that we haven't raised already about the network or local government professionals or something else that might be relevant, we can do that here. As I said, we're working on a service review series of workshops looking at different tiers of where councils might be. Hope that's of value for everyone in that service review journey. If I've got no other questions or comments, take that as a no. All right, so thank you for our presenters and speakers today, right across the board. Thank you. These things don't happen by themselves. They do take a bit of effort and concentration. And thank you for your attendance today. I know 2 hours can be quite a stretch when we're all very, very busy. So appreciate your time. We were going to try, if we've got time, if anyone wanted to hang back, we're going to stop the recording, just have a kind of free session if anyone has anything else on IPR related, or they wanted to have a chat to someone about doing something that they've seen from another council. That's why it's important to put your council name on the chat. We're going to do that now. So I'll hang around for a few minutes if anyone's got any questions or comments. I'll turn the recording off if you want to raise something a bit more confidential. But if not, everyone take care. Thanks for your attention.